The crimson sand of Xerion Prime swirled around Captain Zara Veltar as she gripped the broken shaft of her plasma lance. The once proud weapon, capable of piercing through starship hulls, now lay in smoking pieces around her boots. The Korth Empire's war machines had finally cornered her after 3 days of running through the desert wastes. Zara's silver-scaled skin gleamed with sweat beneath her damaged battle armor. As a member of the proud Althari warrior caste, she had never retreated from a fight in her 23 cycles of service. But today was different. Today she faced impossible odds with broken equipment and no hope of rescue. The massive Korth assault mechs formed a perfect circle around her position. Each one stood 30 feet tall, bristling with enough firepower to level a city block. Their red optical sensors glowed like hungry eyes in the dust storm. The mechanical voice of their commander echoed across the battlefield through external speakers. Althari warrior, you have fought well, but your rebellion ends here. Surrender now, and the Korth Empire may show mercy to your homeworld. Zara spat into the sand, her reptilian features twisted with defiance. The Korth had already destroyed 17 colony worlds in their relentless expansion across the Outer Rim. Her people's ancient honor code demanded she die fighting, rather than submit to these machine-worshipping conquerors. She reached for her backup plasma pistol, knowing it would barely scratch the paint on these towering war machines. The irony wasn't lost on her. 3 days ago, she had been leading a successful raid on a Korth supply depot. Her Lance squadron had been winning the war, slowly pushing back the mechanical tide that threatened to consume the galaxy. Then the trap had sprung. Intelligence reports had been wrong. The supply depot was bait, heavily defended by an entire Korth mechanized division. Her squadron had been obliterated in the first wave of the ambush. Only her superior piloting skills and a dying comrade's sacrifice had allowed her to escape the initial slaughter. Now she stood alone in the howling wind, surrounded by the very machines that had murdered her warriors. The Korth commander's mech took a thunderous step forward, its massive cannon already charging with deadly energy. Your silence speaks volumes, Althari. You choose death over wisdom. So be it. Zara raised her pistol with steady hands, her warrior training overriding the fear that clawed at her hearts. She would not give these machines the satisfaction of seeing her tremble. If death was her fate, she would meet it with the dignity of her ancestors. The charging whine of 30 heavy cannons filled the air. Targeting lasers painted red dots across her armor as the Korth mechs prepared to reduce her to atoms. Zara closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to the eternal flame, asking that her spirit might find peace among the stars. But death did not come. Instead, a sound she had never heard before cut through the storm. It was a deep rumbling roar that seemed to shake the very ground beneath her feet. The Korth mechs hesitated, their sensors scanning the sky above for the source of the disturbance. Zara opened her eyes and looked up through the swirling sand. At first she saw nothing but the angry orange clouds of the dust storm. Then, like a falling star, something burst through the atmospheric chaos above them. It was a ship, but unlike any vessel in her extensive military database. Where Althari ships were sleek and curved like living creatures, and Korth vessels were angular and mechanical, this craft seemed to blend both philosophies. It was clearly artificial, yet possessed an organic fluidity that spoke of advanced engineering beyond anything she had encountered. The ship dove straight down toward the circle of Korth mechs, showing no fear of their concentrated firepower. As it descended, Zara could make out details that defied explanation. The hull seemed to be made of some unknown metal that shifted color in the light. Weapon ports that shouldn't exist on a ship that size bristled along its flanks. Most shocking of all was its size. The vessel was barely larger than a heavy fighter, yet it was diving alone into a formation that could destroy a battle cruiser. Either its pilot was insane, or they possessed capabilities that bordered on the impossible. The Korth commander's voice crackled with electronic confusion. Unknown vessel, you are interfering with Imperial operations. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed. The response came in a voice unlike any Zara had heard. It was calm, measured, and carried an undertone of absolute confidence that sent chills down her spine. Negative, Korth Command. I see a warrior in need of assistance. That's all the authorization I require. As the strange ship leveled out just above the desert floor, Zara caught a glimpse of markings on its hull. The symbols were completely alien to her, but somehow they filled her with a strange sense of hope. Whatever species had built this craft, They had chosen to intervene in a hopeless battle against overwhelming odds. The first Korth mech opened fire, its massive cannon sending a bolt of superheated plasma, streaking toward the descending ship. Zara expected to see the small vessel vaporized instantly. Instead, she watched in amazement as the ship simply wasn't there when the bolt arrived. It had moved with impossible speed and precision, dodging the attack as if it had known where the shot would be aimed before the trigger was pulled. Then the unknown ship began to return fire, and Zara's understanding of warfare changed forever. The weapons that emerged from the mysterious ship defied everything Zara knew about physics and warfare. Instead of the familiar plasma bolts or laser beams she expected, streams of what looked like liquid metal poured from the vessel's gun ports. The strange projectiles moved too fast for the eye to follow, yet somehow maintained perfect accuracy despite the chaotic movement of their platform. When the first stream struck a Korth assault mech, the result was catastrophic. The 30-foot war machine simply came apart, its armor plating peeling away like flower petals, as the unknown ammunition tore through systems that should have been impervious to anything short of capital ship weapons. The mech's pilot didn't even have time to scream before his cockpit was breached and vented to the toxic atmosphere. The Korth formation immediately shifted tactics, recognizing they faced something beyond their understanding. The remaining 29 mechs spread out, trying to surround the darting ship with overlapping fields of fire. Their coordination was perfect, a testament to their machine-enhanced reflexes and shared tactical network. It didn't matter. The alien ship moved through their formation like a predator among prey, never staying in one place long enough for their targeting systems to lock on. Zara watched in fascination as the pilot seemed to anticipate every attack before it happened, flowing around incoming fire with an almost artistic grace. But it was more than just superior piloting. The ship itself seemed to bend the rules of physics. It made turns that should have liquefied any organic pilot, stopped and accelerated without regard for momentum, and somehow managed to fire in directions that its weapons shouldn't have been able to target. A second Korth mech exploded, then a third. Each death was swift and precise, surgical strikes that found weaknesses in armor that had been designed to withstand anything the galaxy could throw at it. The mysterious pilot wasn't just winning. They were making it look effortless. The Korth commander's voice cut through the chaos, now tinged with something Zara had never heard from the Empire before: uncertainty. All units, concentrate fire on Grid 77 Alpha. Predictive targeting protocols engaged. This pilot cannot maintain these maneuvers indefinitely. Zara realized with growing excitement that the Korth were wrong. The unknown ship wasn't straining against its limits. It was just getting started. As if responding to the challenge, the vessel suddenly split apart. For a terrifying moment, Zara thought the ship had been destroyed. Then she understood what she was seeing. The craft hadn't broken apart, it had transformed. What had been a single fighter was now 3 smaller vessels, each moving independently but with perfect coordination. The transformation was seamless, occurring in the space between heartbeats. One moment there was one ship dodging 30 different weapons. The next there were 3 ships engaging 10 targets each. The tactical advantage shifted so quickly that half the Korth mechs were destroyed before they could adjust their targeting solutions. As she watched the impossible battle unfold around her, Zara began to understand that she was witnessing something historic. This wasn't just a rescue. It was first contact with a species that possessed technology so advanced it might as well have been magic. The 3 smaller ships moved in perfect harmony, their attacks coordinated with inhuman precision. They didn't just fight as a unit, they fought as if they shared a single mind. When one ship engaged a target, the others would already be positioning themselves to exploit the distraction. When a Korth mech tried to flee, it would find its escape route already blocked by weapons fire. But the most disturbing aspect of the battle was the complete absence of communication between the 3 ships. In every fleet engagement Zara had ever witnessed, constant chatter filled the communication channels as pilots coordinated their attacks and called out threats. These ships operated in perfect silence, as if speech was unnecessary for beings of their caliber. The Korth commander made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. His remaining mechs formed a tight defensive cluster around Zara's position, using her as an unwilling shield while they concentrated their fire on the approaching ships. Alien vessels, cease fire immediately. Any further attacks will result in the death of the prisoner. Withdraw, and we will discuss terms." The response was immediate and chilling. The three ships suddenly reformed into their original configuration. The transformation happening so quickly that Zara barely registered the movement. Then the unified vessel spoke in that same calm, measured voice. "Terms are simple. Leave this world immediately and never return. The warrior under your guns is under my protection now." The Korth commander's mechanical laughter grated through his external speakers. "You're outnumbered 15-1, alien. Your vessel is impressive, but not even you can destroy all of us before we kill the prisoner. Withdraw or watch her die." What happened next burned itself into Zara's memory forever. The ship didn't move, didn't fire, didn't even seem to react to the threat. Instead, something impossible occurred. The Korth mechs simply stopped. Not destroyed, not damaged, not even powered down. They simply ceased all movement as if someone had pressed a universal pause button. Weapon arms froze mid-rotation. Targeting systems locked in place, and the constant hum of their fusion reactors fell silent. In the sudden quiet of the desert, the alien ship's voice carried clearly to every corner of the battlefield. "I offered terms once. I don't offer twice." Then, one by one, the frozen Korth mechs began to collapse, not from weapon damage or system failure, but as if some fundamental force holding them together had simply been withdrawn. They fell like abandoned puppets, their armor plates scattering across the sand as internal systems died without explanation. Within moments, Zara stood alone among the wreckage of an entire mechanized company, watching as the mysterious ship settled gently onto the desert floor beside her. As the dust began to clear, she could finally get a close look at her savior. The ship was even more beautiful up close, its hull seeming to shift between different shades of blue and silver as her angle of view changed. Strange symbols covered its surface, not painted or etched, but somehow integral to the metal itself. They pulsed with a soft inner light that suggested active systems beyond her comprehension. A section of the hull near what she assumed was the cockpit shimmered and dissolved, revealing an opening that shouldn't have existed moments before. From within, a figure emerged that would change her understanding of what was possible in the galaxy. The being that stepped from the ship was unlike anything in Zara's extensive xenobiology training. At first glance, it appeared almost familiar. Bipedal, roughly her own height, with 2 arms and what seemed to be a standard humanoid configuration. But the similarities ended there. Its skin was a pale pink shade that seemed to shift between different tones depending on the light. Short brown filaments covered the top of its skull in a pattern that defied classification. Most unsettling were its eyes, small round organs that seemed to take in everything around them with an intensity that made Zara feel exposed. The being wore no visible armor, just a simple covering of some dark blue material that offered no apparent protection from weapons or environmental hazards. Either this species was incredibly confident in their defensive capabilities, or they possessed toughness that their appearance didn't suggest. As it approached, Zara noticed the way it moved. There was none of the predatory grace she expected from a warrior capable of destroying an entire Korth company single-handedly. Instead, its gait was measured, almost casual, as if walking through a field of destroyed war machines was a perfectly normal afternoon activity. The being stopped a respectful distance away and performed what Zara assumed was some form of greeting. Gesture, a slight inclination of its head coupled with one raised appendage. When it spoke, its voice carried the same calm confidence she had heard over the communications channel. "Captain Veltar, I presume? I'm Commander Sarah Chen of the Terran Expeditionary Force. Are you injured?" The fact that it knew her name and rank sent chills through Zara's scaled hide. The Korth Empire maintained extensive databases on enemy personnel, but this being claimed to represent something called the Terran Expeditionary Force, a name that appeared in none of her military intelligence briefings. "I am unharmed," Zara replied carefully, keeping her hand near her sidearm despite its obvious uselessness. "Though I confess confusion about your arrival. The Althari Defense Force has no record of a species called Terrans in this sector." The being, Sarah, smiled, revealing small white structures that Zara assumed were teeth. The expression seemed friendly, but Zara had learned that appearances could be deceiving when dealing with unknown species. "That's because we haven't introduced ourselves yet. Earth is about 40,000 light-years in that direction." Sarah gestured vaguely toward the swirling storm clouds above them. We've been watching the conflict between your people and the Korth Empire for some time. Recent developments prompted us to accelerate our first contact timeline. 40,000 light-years. The number hit Zara like a physical blow. The fastest ships in the known galaxy, using the most advanced jump drive technology, could cover perhaps 1,000 light-years in a single transit. The journey from Earth to Zerion Prime should have taken decades. Assuming this Terran expeditionary force had access to technology comparable to the Althari fleet. Yet here stood proof that they had not only made the journey, but done so with a single ship capable of destroying military assets that regularly terrorized entire star systems. Your arrival is timely, Zara said, choosing her words carefully. Diplomatic protocol suggested caution when dealing with species of unknown technological capability. Though I must ask why you chose to intervene. The Korth Empire has made it clear that interference in their expansion will be met with overwhelming force. Sarah's expression darkened slightly, the friendly demeanor replaced by something harder and more dangerous. We've observed Korth expansion techniques. Their definition of overwhelming force tends to involve the systematic extermination of civilian populations. Humans have strong opinions about genocide. The way she said humans suggested it was this species' name for themselves. Zara filed the information away for her eventual intelligence debriefing, assuming she lived long enough to make one. Your ship's capabilities are impressive, Zara continued, glancing at the sleek vessel that had somehow destroyed 29 combat mechs without taking a single hit. The Althari Military Command would be very interested in discussing potential cooperation between our forces. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. I'm sure they would. But first, we need to address the immediate tactical situation. My sensors indicate 17 more Korth mechanized companies converging on this position. They'll arrive within the hour. The blood drained from Zara's face. 17 companies meant over 500 combat mechs plus support vehicles and air cover. Even if this mysterious human ship could repeat its earlier performance, those numbers represented impossible odds. We need to evacuate immediately, Zara said, her military training taking over. My extraction point is 40 kilometers northeast of here. If your ship can— Negative, Sarah interrupted gently. Running now would be a tactical error. The Korth will simply pursue us and eventually they'll corner us in a position without room to maneuver. Better to face them here where we can choose the terms of engagement. Zara stared at the human in disbelief. Commander Chen, with respect, you just faced 30 mechs and emerged victorious through superior technology and the element of surprise. 17 companies represent a completely different order of magnitude. Even if your weapon systems could penetrate their armor, you cannot possibly carry enough ammunition for a sustained engagement of that scale. Sarah's smile returned. But this time it carried an edge that made Zara's warrior instincts scream warnings. Captain, you're making assumptions based on what you've seen so far. Trust me when I say that my ship's combat capabilities are scalable. Before Zara could ask what that meant, her personal communicator crackled to life. The voice that emerged was heavily distorted by electronic interference, but she recognized the distinctive accent of a Korth field commander. Althari warrior, you and your alien ally are surrounded. Surrender immediately and the Empire may show mercy. Continue to resist, and we will demonstrate why the galaxy fears Korth military might. Sarah walked over to one of the destroyed mechs and casually placed her hand on its armored hull. To Zara's amazement, the human seemed to be reading information directly from the machine's systems, her eyes unfocused as if processing data streams invisible to normal senses. Interesting, Sarah murmured. Their communication network is more sophisticated than I initially assessed. Quantum encrypted channels, real-time tactical coordination, shared targeting solutions. The Korth have clearly been studying the strengths and weaknesses of galactic military doctrine. She turned back to Zara with an expression that mixed professional interest with something approaching anticipation. Captain, I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to consider your answer carefully. Are you prepared to witness the true scope of human military capability? The way she phrased the question sent chills through Zara's scales. There was something in Sarah's tone that suggested the earlier battle had been little more than a warm-up exercise. Yes, Zara replied, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was agreeing to. Sarah nodded and tapped a control on her wrist. Echo Base, this is Angel 1. requesting immediate tactical support for ground engagement. Authorization Omega-77. The response came immediately, transmitted on a frequency Zara's equipment couldn't detect but somehow received anyway. Angel 1, this is Echo Base, Omega-77 confirmed. What do you need? Full company deployment, Echo Base. We have indigenous allies on site and 17 hostile mechanized companies inbound. Rules of engagement are weapons-free. Copy that, Angel 1. Company deployment authorized. ETA 90 seconds. As the communication ended, Sarah looked up at the storm-filled sky with an expression of grim satisfaction. Captain Veltar, I'd recommend you find some cover. Things are about to get very loud around here. The sky above Zirion Prime began to change in ways that defied natural explanation. What had been swirling clouds of dust and atmospheric debris suddenly parted like curtains being drawn aside, revealing a vista that stopped Zara's hearts in their tracks. Ships. Hundreds of them. They hung in perfect formation above the battlefield, each one similar in design to Sarah's vessel, but scaled up to sizes that challenged comprehension. The smallest were the size of Althari destroyers, while the largest dwarfed anything in Zara's experience of space warfare. They had appeared without warning, without the telltale energy signatures of jump drives or faster-than-light emergence that should have announced their arrival. As Zara watched in stunned silence, the ships began to descend through the atmosphere with impossible grace. There was no plasma trail from atmospheric entry, no visible propulsion systems straining against gravity. They simply fell toward the surface as if the planet's gravitational field was merely a suggestion they could choose to ignore. How? Zara whispered, her military mind struggling to process what her eyes were reporting. Ships that size should not be able to achieve atmospheric entry without massive propulsion systems. The energy requirements alone would be insurmountable using conventional technology, Sarah finished calmly. Humans stopped using conventional technology several centuries ago. The lead ship, a vessel that could have served as a mobile space station, settled onto the desert floor with the delicate touch of a falling leaf. Its hull was covered in the same shifting symbols that marked Sarah's fighter, but these glowed with an intensity that painted the surrounding sand in shades of blue and silver. Sections of the massive ship's hull began to iris open, revealing cargo bays that seemed to contain their own pocket dimensions. From these impossible spaces, vehicles began to emerge that redefined Zara's understanding of ground warfare. They looked like mechs at first glance, but where Korth machines were angular and mechanical, these human war machines possessed an organic fluidity that made them seem almost alive. They moved with predatory grace, their weapon systems swiveling and tracking with an awareness that suggested intelligence beyond simple programming. But it was their scale that truly impressed. The smallest human mech stood 40 feet tall, dwarfing the Korth assault units that had seemed so imposing minutes earlier. The largest were mobile fortresses that bristled with enough firepower to level mountains. As more ships landed and disgorged their mechanical cargo, Zara began to understand the true scope of what Sarah had called full company deployment. What was emerging from the human vessels wasn't just a military unit. It was a complete ecosystem of war support. Vehicles that defied classification moved between the combat mechs, their purposes unclear but their sophistication obvious. Flying drones the size of fighters, but with the maneuverability of insects, swarmed through the air, establishing what appeared to be a comprehensive sensor network across the entire battlefield. Captain, Sarah said, drawing Zara's attention back to ground level. I need you to stay close to me during the engagement. Your safety is paramount. But I also want you to observe our tactics. What you witness here will be important for future cooperation between our species. Zara nodded numbly, still trying to process the magnitude of what she was seeing. How many ships do you have up there? This is a light reconnaissance force, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. We brought 300 vessels for this operation. The main fleet is still in deep space monitoring Korth response patterns. 300 ships. The entire Althari Defense Force fielded less than 200 vessels across all their worlds, and most of those were patrol boats and system defense platforms. The humans had deployed a larger force than her people's entire military, just to respond to a single distress call. The ground began to vibrate as the human mechs moved into position. They didn't march in formation like traditional military units. Instead, they flowed across the terrain like a tide of metal and energy. each machine finding its optimal position in a complex tactical arrangement that Zara couldn't begin to analyze. Her personal communicator crackled again, this time carrying the panicked voice of a Korth field commander.
All units, priority override.
Unknown hostiles have deployed significant assets on the primary battlefield. Recommend immediate withdrawal pending heavy support. A different voice carrying more authority cut through the channel. Negative, Ground Commander. The Empire does not retreat from alien primitives. Continue your advance. Orbital support is standing by. Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. Orbital support. That's unfortunate. She tapped her wrist communicator again. Echo Base, be advised that Korth forces have heavy orbital assets in system. Request tactical assessment. Angel 1, we're tracking 4 heavy cruisers and 2 dreadnoughts in high orbit. Weapons and shields are consistent with standard Imperial specifications. Do you require fleet support? Negative, Echo Base. Local assets should be sufficient. Maintain defensive posture unless the situation escalates. Zara grabbed Sarah's arm in alarm. Commander, Korth dreadnoughts carry planet-killer weaponry. If they decide to use orbital bombardment, no ground force can survive that kind of firepower. Sarah's smile was genuinely reassuring this time. Captain, humans have been dealing with orbital threats for a very long time. Trust me, the Korth fleet is not going to be a factor in this engagement. As if summoned by her words, new contacts appeared on Zara's personal scanner. 6 objects had separated from the human fleet above and were climbing rapidly toward orbital altitude. They were much smaller than the ships that had landed, barely the size of fighters, but something about their trajectory suggested capabilities far beyond their apparent specifications. What are those? Zara asked, pointing at her scanner display. Orbital interdiction platforms, Sarah replied casually. Think of them as very polite requests for the Korth fleet to withdraw from the system. The first wave of Korth ground forces appeared on the horizon, their assault mechs kicking up massive dust clouds as they advanced in formation. Zara counted at least 200 units in the lead element, with more formations visible behind them stretching to the horizon. The human mechs didn't react to the approaching threat with anything resembling urgency. They simply continued their fluid repositioning, weapons systems tracking and analyzing targets with inhuman precision. Some of the larger units began to unfold additional weapon arrays, revealing capabilities that had been hidden within their seemingly organic frames. Sarah checked a display on her wrist and nodded with satisfaction. Orbital interdiction is in position. Ground forces are deployed and ready. All that's left is to send the Korth a formal declaration of intent. She activated her communicator one final time, but this transmission was clearly directed at the approaching enemy forces. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Korth forces, this is Commander Sarah Chen of the Terran Expeditionary Force. You are trespassing on a world under human protection. You have 60 seconds to begin withdrawal procedures before we demonstrate why that's a poor decision. The response was immediate and predictable. Alien vessel, you are interfering with lawful Imperial operations. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences of opposing the Korth Empire. Sarah sighed and looked at Zara with an expression of weary resignation. We tried diplomacy. Captain, you might want to cover your ears. Humans tend to be rather loud when we're making a point. The battle began not with the thunderous roar of conventional weapons, but with something far more disturbing. Absolute silence. Every Korth mech in the advancing formation simply stopped moving. 200 war machines that had been charging across the desert at maximum speed became motionless statues, their weapon systems frozen mid-rotation, their communication arrays silent. It was as if someone had reached into their control systems and pressed a universal pause button. Zara watched in horrified fascination as the impossible scene unfolded. The human mechs hadn't fired a single shot, hadn't even moved from their positions, yet somehow, they had neutralized an entire armored division without visible effort. How? She breathed, unable to comprehend what she was witnessing. Electromagnetic pulse weapons, Sarah explained calmly, as if discussing the weather. Very focused, very precise. We target the specific frequency ranges that Korth technology uses for internal communications. Their machines become very expensive paperweights. But even as she spoke, the frozen Korth mechs began to move again. Emergency systems activated. Backup power sources came online and hardened communication networks re-established contact. The Empire's military doctrine clearly included countermeasures for electronic warfare. Sarah nodded approvingly. Adaptive technology. Impressive. The Korth clearly learned from their encounters. She spoke into her communicator with the same casual tone. All units, electromagnetic warfare is ineffective. Switch to kinetic solutions. What happened next redefined Zara's understanding of the word kinetic. The human mechs opened fire simultaneously, but their weapons bore no resemblance to anything in galactic military doctrine. Instead of energy beams or plasma bolts, they launched what appeared to be streams of liquid metal that moved at velocities approaching light speed. When these projectiles struck their targets, the results were catastrophic. Korth assault mechs didn't just explode, they ceased to exist. The strange ammunition seemed to unravel the molecular bonds holding their armor together, causing 30-foot war machines to collapse into their component atoms in showers of sparking debris. But the truly terrifying aspect was the precision. Each human mech fired exactly once, and each shot found its target, despite the extreme range and the chaos of battle. 200 Korth machines were reduced to scrap metal in less than 10 seconds. Their destruction so swift and complete that their pilots never had time to register what was happening. The silence that followed was broken by panicked voices on Korth communication channels. Field commanders who had never known defeat struggled to comprehend a battlefield where their most advanced weapons were useless against enemies they couldn't even effectively target. Second wave. Advance immediately. Concentrate fire on the alien positions. More Korth formations appeared on the horizon, these ones moving with greater caution but no less determination. Zara counted at least 400 mechs in the second assault, supported by aerial units and long-range artillery platforms that hadn't been present in the first wave. Sarah observed the approaching forces with professional interest. They're adapting their tactics. Spread formation to minimize area effect weapons, air cover to spot for artillery, heavy units staying back to provide fire support. The Korth military doctrine is more sophisticated than our intelligence suggested. The human response was equally adaptive. The organic-looking mechs began to shift and flow across the battlefield, their formations changing like a living organism, responding to external stimuli. Some units seemed to melt into the landscape, their outlines becoming indistinct until they were nearly invisible against the desert background. Others underwent more dramatic transformations. Zara watched in amazement as several of the larger human mechs simply came apart, their components scattering across the battlefield before reassembling into entirely different configurations. What had been walking fortresses became sleek aircraft that took to the skies to engage the Korth air support. The battle that followed was unlike anything Zara had studied in her military education. It wasn't a clash between two forces using similar weapons and tactics. It was a demonstration of technological superiority so complete that it bordered on the supernatural Korth aircraft that had ruled the skies over dozens of conquered worlds found themselves outmaneuvered by human flyers that seemed to ignore the laws of physics. Their missiles couldn't lock onto targets that moved in impossible ways. Their energy weapons couldn't track ships that appeared to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. On the ground, Korth artillery positions were eliminated before they could fire their first salvos. Human mechs moved through their formations like shadows, appearing behind enemy lines without explanation, striking with surgical precision, then vanishing before return fire could be coordinated. Most disturbing of all was the complete absence of human casualties. The Korth forces were being systematically dismantled, but their enemies seemed untouchable. Every shot missed its target. Every tactical maneuver was anticipated and countered. Every desperate gambit failed against opposition that fought with inhuman coordination. Through it all, Sarah stood beside Zara with the calm demeanor of someone watching a training exercise rather than a battle for planetary control. She occasionally spoke into her communicator, offering tactical adjustments or requesting status updates, but her tone never suggested urgency or concern. Third wave is approaching from the east, she mentioned conversationally. Artillery support from the northern ridgeline. The Korth commander is competent. He's using the terrain effectively and coordinating his assets well. Zara looked at her scanner and felt her blood turn to ice. The third wave consisted of over 600 mechs, including heavy assault units that she recognized as planetary siege platforms. These were weapons designed to crack fortified positions that could withstand orbital bombardment. "Commander," she said urgently, Those siege platforms carry fusion warheads. If they achieve firing position, they'll irradiate this entire continent. Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. Fusion warheads. That would indeed be problematic for the local ecosystem. She activated her communicator with a slight frown. Echo Base, be advised that Korth forces are deploying strategic weapons. Request permission to escalate response. Angel 1, escalation authorized. Rules of engagement updated to unrestricted warfare. The change in the human forces was immediate and terrifying. Where before they had moved with deadly efficiency, now they flowed across the battlefield like a force of nature. The remaining Korth formations didn't just face superior technology, they faced an enemy that had stopped holding back. Human mechs that had seemed large, before suddenly revealed that their apparent size was only a fraction of their true capabilities. They unfolded, expanded, and transformed into weapons platforms that dwarfed anything the Korth Empire had ever fielded. The desert floor shook under the weight of machines that had somehow been compressed into impossibly small spaces. But even more shocking was what happened in orbit. Zara's scanner detected massive energy discharges far above the planet's atmosphere, followed by the complete disappearance of the Korth fleet signatures. "Your orbital interdiction platforms," she said in amazement. "They destroyed 6 capital ships?" Sarah shook her head. "Destroyed? No, that would be wasteful. We simply relocated them to a safe distance where they can observe without interfering. The Korth crews are unharmed, though I suspect they're rather confused about their current position relative to the galactic core." As the third Korth wave met the unleashed human forces, Zara began to understand that she wasn't just witnessing a battle. She was watching the introduction of a new player to galactic politics, one that possessed capabilities so far beyond anything previously encountered that existing power structures would have to be completely reconsidered. The battlefield had become a graveyard of Korth ambitions, where 3 massive mechanized armies had advanced with the confidence of conquerors. Only twisted metal-infused sand remained. The human forces moved through the wreckage with methodical precision, ensuring that no enemy systems remained operational, while carefully avoiding any action that might harm surviving Korth. Personnel Zara watched in fascination, as human medical units, machines she hadn't even noticed during the battle, worked to extract injured Korth pilots from their destroyed mechs. The same forces that had demonstrated such overwhelming destructive capability were now displaying an almost obsessive concern for enemy casualties. "Why?" she asked Sarah, gesturing toward the rescue operations. "These soldiers came here to kill both of us. Why risk your people to save them?" Sarah's expression grew serious, the casual demeanor she had maintained throughout the battle replaced by something deeper and more complex. Because the moment they stopped being a threat, they became people in need of help. Humans have learned the hard way that how you treat defeated enemies determines what kind of species you become. The philosophy behind the statement intrigued Zara. In her military experience, defeated enemies were either taken prisoner for intelligence purposes or eliminated to prevent future threats. The idea of expending resources to aid enemy wounded was alien to Althari military doctrine. Before she could ask for clarification, her communicator crackled with an incoming transmission on a priority frequency she recognized as belonging to Althari High Command. "Captain Veltar, this is Admiral Keshavarn aboard the battlecruiser Righteous Flame. We have been monitoring the engagement through your suit's telemetry systems. Report your status immediately." Zara glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "Admiral, I am unharmed and currently under the protection of forces representing the Terran Expeditionary Force. The Korth assault has been repelled with minimal collateral damage to planetary infrastructure." A long pause followed, during which Zara could almost hear the Admiral processing the implications of her report. When he spoke again, his voice carried the careful tone of someone navigating uncharted diplomatic waters. "Captain, our sensors detected significant energy discharges in your vicinity, but we were unable to penetrate the electromagnetic interference to assess the tactical situation. Are you saying that this Terran Expeditionary Force successfully engaged 3 Korth mechanized armies?" "That is correct, Admiral. Furthermore, they have demonstrated capabilities that suggest their technological advancement exceeds anything in our current understanding of galactic military doctrine." Another pause, this one even longer. Zara could imagine the chaos that must be erupting in the Althari command center as intelligence officers struggled to process information that contradicted everything they thought they knew about the strategic balance of power in the galaxy. Captain, the righteous flame will reach your position in approximately 6 hours. Until then, you are ordered to gather as much intelligence as possible about these humans and their capabilities. Exercise extreme caution, but attempt to determine their intentions regarding the ongoing conflict with the Korth Empire. As the communication ended, Sarah looked at Zara with an amused expression. Your admiral seems cautious. That's wise. First contact situations require careful handling. She paused, seeming to consider her next words carefully. Captain, would you be interested in seeing how this conflict began from our perspective? The offer intrigued Zara. Human intelligence gathering capabilities were clearly far more advanced than anything she had previously encountered. The opportunity to understand their analysis of the Korth threat could provide valuable insights for future Althari military planning. I would be honored, she replied formally. Sarah led her toward one of the landed human ships, its hull still shimmering with those strange symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. As they approached, a section of the vessel's surface simply faded away, revealing an interior that defied spatial logic. The ship's interior was larger than its exterior dimensions should have allowed, filled with displays and control surfaces that bore no resemblance to any technology in Zara's experience. But what drew her attention were the holographic projections that filled the air around them. Three-dimensional maps showing star systems, trade routes, and fleet movements across vast sections of the galaxy. We've been monitoring galactic affairs for approximately 200 of your years, Sarah explained, gesturing toward the displays. Initial contact protocols required extensive observation before revealing our presence. What we discovered about the Korth Empire was disturbing. The holographic displays shifted, showing the progression of Korth expansion over the past several decades. Zara watched in horror as world after world fell to Imperial forces, their populations either enslaved or eliminated depending on their usefulness to the war machine. 47 civilizations completely exterminated, Sarah continued quietly. 112 species reduced to slave labor status. Entire star systems stripped of resources to fuel further expansion. The pattern is clear and consistent. The Korth Empire represents an existential threat to all organic life in the galaxy. The displays zoomed in to show specific battle sites, refugee convoys in the aftermath of Korth occupation. Zara recognized some of the locations from intelligence reports, but the human data was far more comprehensive than anything in Althari files. Your people have been fighting valiantly, Sarah said, indicating fleet positions that showed the ongoing struggle between Althari and Korth forces. But the mathematical projections are clear. Without intervention, Althari resistance will collapse within 18 months. The Empire's industrial capacity simply outweighs yours by orders of magnitude. The harsh reality of the strategic situation hit Zara like a physical blow. She had known that the war was not going well, but seeing the comprehensive analysis laid out in such detail made the hopelessness of their position undeniable. However, Sarah continued, and the displays shifted to show new projections. Human intervention changes the equation dramatically. Our technological advantages make Korth numerical superiority irrelevant in direct confrontation. New scenarios played out in the holographic space, showing potential battle outcomes with human forces involved. The results were one-sided to an almost absurd degree. Korth fleets that had terrorized entire sectors were reduced to scrap metal by forces a fraction of their size. The question, Sarah said, turning to face Zara directly, is what happens after we've neutralized the immediate threat. Humans have no interest in becoming galactic overlords, but we also cannot allow a power vacuum that might lead to even worse conflicts. The implication was clear. The humans possessed the capability to end the Korth threat permanently, but they were concerned about the long-term consequences of their intervention. It was a level of strategic thinking that impressed Zara. Most species with such overwhelming military advantage would simply impose their will and deal with the consequences later. What are you proposing? Zara asked. A coalition, Sarah replied. Multiple species working together to maintain galactic stability, without any single power dominating the others. Humans would provide technological assistance and military support where needed, but local governance would remain in the hands of indigenous populations. It was an elegant solution, but Zara could see potential complications. The Althari High Council would need guarantees that human assistance wouldn't come with hidden costs or obligations. Sarah nodded understandingly. Naturally. We're prepared to share significant technological advances as a demonstration of good faith, including defensive systems that would make Althari worlds effectively immune to Korth attack methods. The offer was staggering. Access to human technology could transform the Althari from a struggling resistance movement into a major galactic power overnight. But Zara's military training made her cautious of offers that seemed too good to be true. "Commander," she said carefully, "with respect, your people clearly possess capabilities that border on the impossible. Why do you need allies at all? You could end the Korth threat and reshape galactic politics entirely without our assistance." Sarah's smile carried a hint of sadness. "Because that's exactly the kind of thinking that created the Korth Empire in the first place. Power without accountability, strength without wisdom, technology without compassion. We've seen what happens when any species decides they know what's best for everyone else." The honesty of the answer impressed Zara more than all the technological demonstrations she had witnessed. Here was a species with the power to conquer the galaxy, yet they were seeking partnership rather than dominance. It suggested a level of philosophical sophistication that matched their technological advancement. A soft chime drew their attention to one of the displays, where new contact indicators were appearing at the edge of the system. Sarah's expression grew alert as she read the incoming data. "It seems your Admiral's timeline has been accelerated," she said. "Althari fleet elements are approaching much faster than expected. And they're not alone." The holographic displays around them shifted to show the approaching fleet in detail. What Zara saw made her blood run cold with both hope and terror. The Althari task force was indeed larger than expected. 6 battlecruisers, 12 destroyers, and a full carrier group. But they were not alone. Korth Imperial ships shadowed the Althari formation, maintaining just enough distance to avoid triggering an immediate engagement, while clearly positioning themselves to exploit any weakness that might emerge. Worse, the sensor readings indicated these weren't the standard Imperial vessels they had been fighting. These ships were larger, more heavily armed, and displayed energy signatures that suggested significant technological upgrades. "The Korth Empire's response fleet," Sarah observed, studying the tactical display with professional interest. 3 dreadnoughts, 8 heavy cruisers, and what appears to be a planetary bombardment platform. They're taking this development very seriously indeed. Zara felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. What had begun as a simple rescue mission was rapidly escalating into a confrontation that could determine the fate of multiple species. The decisions made in the next few hours would either forge a new alliance that could bring peace to the galaxy, or trigger a conflict that might destroy everything her people had fought to protect. "Can your forces handle ships of that magnitude?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Sarah's expression remained calm, but something in her eyes suggested that the approaching Korth fleet represented a welcome challenge rather than a cause for concern. "The question isn't whether we can handle them, Captain. The question is whether we should." Before Zara could ask what that meant, Admiral Kesheverin's voice cut through the ship's communication system. Somehow the humans had patched into the Althari fleet's command frequency without any apparent effort. "Terran vessels, this is Admiral Keshveron of the Althari Defense Force. We request immediate communication with your commanding officer regarding the safety of our personnel and the developing tactical situation." Sarah activated a response panel with a gesture that seemed to involve nothing more than thinking in the right direction. "Admiral Keshveron, this is Commander Chen. Captain Veltar is safe and unharmed. As for the tactical situation, I believe that requires a more detailed discussion." "Agreed, Commander. However, the Korth Imperial fleet is demanding that we withdraw immediately and turn over any alien technology for Imperial examination. They have given us 1 hour to comply before beginning hostile action against both our forces and yours." The ultimatum wasn't unexpected, but its timing created a complex strategic problem. The Althari fleet was caught between unknown human capabilities and overwhelming Korth force projection. Making the wrong choice could result in the complete destruction of the most powerful remaining element of Althari military strength. Sarah's response surprised Zara with its directness. "Admiral, I'm going to suggest something that may sound unconventional. Rather than attempting to negotiate from positions of weakness, why don't we arrange a demonstration of what cooperation between our forces might accomplish? A long pause followed, during which Zara could imagine the frantic discussions taking place aboard the Althari flagship. Finally, the Admiral's voice returned, carrying a tone of careful resolve. Commander Chen, the Althari High Council has authorized me to explore all options for ensuring our people's survival. What kind of demonstration did you have in mind? The Korth fleet represents approximately 40,000 enemy personnel aboard ships designed to terrorize civilian populations into submission. I propose we offer them the opportunity to withdraw peacefully. If they decline, we demonstrate why threatening our allies is a poor tactical decision. The casual way Sarah discussed engaging a force that could destroy entire planetary defense networks sent chills through Zara's scales. But she was beginning to understand that human military doctrine operated on scales and principles that bore little resemblance to conventional galactic warfare. The hour that followed was filled with increasingly desperate negotiations as multiple factions tried to avoid a confrontation that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. The Korth demanded unconditional surrender and technology transfer. The Althari sought guarantees of protection without fully understanding what they were allying themselves with. The humans waited with infinite patience while making it clear that their offer of peaceful resolution had definite time limits. When the deadline expired, the Korth response was predictably aggressive. The Imperial dreadnoughts opened fire simultaneously, targeting both the Althari fleet and the human ships with enough concentrated firepower to crack planetary crusts. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations to come, assuming there were any military academies left when the dust settled. The human defensive response was so swift and comprehensive that the Korth attack might as well have been launched against a different universe. Every incoming projectile, every energy beam, every missile salvo simply ceased to exist as it approached the human ships. Not deflected, not absorbed, not neutralized, simply removed from reality as if it had never been fired. The counterattack was equally impossible. The human fleet, which had appeared to consist of 300 relatively small vessels, suddenly revealed that appearances could be profoundly deceiving. Ships that had seemed the size of frigates unfolded into configurations that dwarfed the Korth dreadnoughts. Weapon systems that had no business existing on platforms of any size emerged from pocket dimensions that violated every known law of physics. The engagement lasted exactly 47 seconds. When it ended, the Korth Imperial fleet had been completely disarmed and immobilized, their crews unharmed but their ships reduced to the technological equivalent of ancient sailing vessels. They hung in space like monuments to the futility of challenging forces beyond their comprehension. Through it all, the Althari fleet remained completely untouched, protected by defensive fields that had appeared around them without warning and proved impervious to weapons that should have been capable of destroying small moons. In the stunned silence that followed, Sarah's voice carried clearly to every ship in the system. This concludes our demonstration. The Korth Imperial fleet is free to withdraw to a safe distance, while their government considers whether continued expansion serves their people's best interests. The Althari fleet is invited to join us for detailed discussions about mutual cooperation and galactic stability. Admiral Keshevaran's response came after a long pause, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had just witnessed the impossible. Commander Chen, on behalf of the Althari High Council, I accept your invitation. I believe we have much to discuss about the future of our galaxy. As Zara watched the various fleets repositioning themselves according to the new reality, she realized that everything had changed. The war that had consumed her people's resources and claimed countless lives was effectively over. The Korth Empire's expansion had been stopped not by superior strategy or greater numbers, but by the simple reality that they had encountered something beyond their ability to comprehend or defeat. But more importantly, her people had found allies who possessed the power to reshape the galaxy, yet chose to offer partnership instead of dominance. The humans had kept their promise. They had descended from the heavens when hope seemed lost, and they had asked not for submission but for cooperation. Standing in the impossible interior of Sarah's ship, surrounded by technology that made fantasy seem mundane, Zara smiled for the first time in months. The question that had driven her through 3 days of desperate flight across a hostile desert had finally been answered. Yes, she would join this battle. Not as a desperate warrior fighting impossible odds, but as part of something larger and more hopeful than anything she had dared to imagine. The humans had shown them a path forward that led not to conquest or domination, but to a future where species could work together to build something better than any of them could achieve alone. The war was over. The real work was just beginning.